10 phantom ships that still haunt the oceans. They are known as ghost ships or phantom ships. They constitute an important aspect of the mysteries of the oceans. A sailor would love nothing more than scaring the hell out of a person who was willing to listen about these haunted vessels drifting adrift over the seas. In most cases, these sailors may be telling the truth. It is believed that many ghost ships are crawling through the ocean. Some of these vessels have neither crew nor any passengers. Others are simple, coming into view and then vanishing into the mist. Below, you will find 10 phantom ships that still haunt the ocean today. 10. The Kaluk. When we think of ghost ships, we're supposed to imagine them as rare and transient vessels depicting a tragedy that befell the crew of a vessel a long time ago. Or else we imagine a derelict devoid of intelligence and holding a mystery on board with all of the ship's passengers missing. But one story from the long and rich history of Chiloé Island suggests that one ghost ship, the Kaluk, could be so much more than a typical ghost ship. And the fact that the legend also suggests that it is seen by someone somewhere every night is no small matter either. It's said witnesses who observe the distant ship will note the sounds of merriment and music on board as the lurching behemoth flows with its mournful chorus all around it, both fascinating and chilling those who witness its approach. The people on board are said to be gloriously happy, as though everything, including death, were somehow cast away into the distant inky blackness of night, with only the warmth and happiness of the moment remaining. And that's precisely, according to the legend, what has happened to them. It's said the crew on board the ship are the undiscovered lost souls of the sea, who have been brought back to life by the mythical mermaids who tend to the missing, and bring them to the Kaluk so that their existence need not be one of loneliness tumbled by the harsh and unforgiving waves of the ocean forever. But not all of those on board the ship are necessarily good. The mysterious and ancient warlocks of Chiloé lore are also able to make their way onto the vessel by means of a massive horse capable of galloping over water. The sorcerers, despite their evil nature however, are welcomed with open arms aboard the ship where the festivities continue. But not necessarily treated so well are the kidnapped fishermen who are dragged screaming aboard the vessel, and must live out the rest of their existence performing the duties of the ship, and maintaining the ever-growing party. These fishermen have been said to occasionally come into conflict with the vessel itself, though the guests of the party are generally not interested in fighting. Rather, the Kaluk acts as a sentient being in itself, which ensures the fishermen perform its duties, although how is a matter that changes from story to story. Some say it has the ability to control the minds of fishermen, while others suggest it could have something to do with another mysterious group of entities on board who rise up from the bilge only on the rare occasions when a mutiny seems certain. The ship is not just any type of ship. The Kaluk is said to be a kind of conscious being that sails the waters around the area. She carries the spirits of all those who have drowned at sea. According to Chiloé mythology, the spirits of the drowned are summoned to the ship by 3 Chiloé water spirits. After appearing for a few moments, the ship is then said to disappear or submerge itself under the water. According to legend, the spirits of the drowned are summoned to the ship by Sirena Chiloé, her sister Pincoya, and their brother Picoy. Sirena Chiloé resembles what we know as mermaids, with the upper body and face of a teen, with long blonde hair and golden scales. Pincoya is said to have long blonde hair, be of incomparable beauty, be cheerful and sensual, and rise from the depths of the sea with her totally human-like body. Picoy has the body of the sea lion with golden fur, and the face of a strikingly attractive human man, with long blonde hair. There appear to be 2 types of passengers aboard the luminous vessel. The spirits of those who drowned at sea are said to be able to continue their existence in a sort of paradise-like existence, instead of being left lonely and cold in the ocean deeps. They are allowed, according to some stories, to even visit home once a year to give aid to their families. However, there are also kidnapped fishermen who are kidnapped and forced to perform the duties as crew. The folklore also says that the evil Brujo Chiloé, the equivalent to the male witch, likes to visit the party on the Kaluk. Although they are evil, they are welcome aboard the ship. They reach the ship by summoning up a magical water horse which is said to be able to gallop upon the surface of the ocean. The legend of the Calanque is one of the more bizarre stories of a ghost ship, but it is also one of the more interesting ones. Where could such an artifact have come from in the minds of a storyteller? Is it deeply symbolic of some aspect of their existence? Or is there perhaps something else behind it lurking and yet to be revealed, something suggesting it could be more than just a story? 9. The SS Valencia. In 1882, William and Sons laid down the keel that would become the iron-hulled passenger steamer, that would become known as the SS Valencia. She was built as a passenger ship to sail the passenger route between California and Alaska. Little did anyone who worked upon her in the yards foresee the horrors that would one day happen upon her. One bright sunny day in 1906, the SS Valencia set off from the city of San Francisco. The ship was not on her normal route. Her sister ship to the SS Pueblo was in the yards, so she took over the San Francisco to Seattle run. She set off on January 20th, her and her 65 crew, and at least 108 passengers set off to destiny. Things were going well, up till the early morning hours on the 21st, when the weather took a turn for the worse off Cape Mendocino in Northern California. With an almost human scream, the ship tore into the reefs. The crew immediately reacted, backing the ship off the rocks. The damage control parties reported a huge gash in her boat, into which the cold waters of the Pacific were rapidly pouring. The captain quickly ordered her run aground, as there was no way the crew could save her. She came to rest 50 feet from the shore in heavy storm-tossed surf. In the confusion that followed, 6 of the 7 lifeboats were lowered before the captain gave the order. 3 flipped over while being lowered, spilling their human cargo into the merciless sea. 2 of the remaining 3 boats capsized immediately, sending their occupants to the same fate as the first 3. 1 boat made it away. The scene was one of noise, confusion and horror, as Frank Lane, one of the few survivors, would later recount. Screams of women and children mingled in an awful chorus with the shrieking of the wind, the dash of rain, and the roar of the breakers. As the passengers rushed on deck, they were carried away in bunches by the huge waves that seemed as high as the ship's mastheads. The ship began to break up almost at once, and the women and children were lashed to the rigging above the reach of the sea. It was a pitiful sight to see frail women, wearing only night dresses, with bare feet on the freezing ratlines, trying to shield children in their arms from the icy wind and rain. This is a shot on January 23, 1906, of the stranded SS Valencia from the decks of one of the ships, standing off, unable to provide assistance. 12 men made it to shore, but their ordeal was not over. 3 were swept back into the howling sea. They were never heard from again. The remaining 9 scaled the sea cliffs and set out for help. Later they would be criticized for not attempting to set up rescue lines with the grounded ship. Of the last remaining lifeboat, the ship's bosun and a crew of volunteers went ashore to see what they could do for the passengers. Upon reaching the shore, they found a trail and sign that put them 3 miles from Cape Beale. They set out on a 2.5-hour forced march to get the lighthouse. Upon arrival, the lighthouse keeper phoned the town, but the news had already been passed, as a group of 9 men had found a telegraph line and followed it to a lineman's hut. The bosun and his party were still frantic as they thought of the last sight they had of the ship, and crew, the brave faces looking at them over the broken rail of the wreck, and of the echo of that great hymn sung by the woman who, looking death smilingly in the face, were able in the fog and mist and flying spray, the hymn that floated over the noise and confusion as the dying ship proceeded into the black, nearer, my God, to thee. 3 ships raced out into the dark night. On the morning of the 24th, the SS Queen reached the disaster site. The weather was too severe to reach the stranded ship, so the Queen maintained station out to sea. A rescue party went overland through the wilderness to effect a rescue from the shore. There were 2 remaining lifeboats on the ship were launched, but the majority of the passengers chose to stay aboard. They believed their salvation was at hand. Fate, however, had other plans. When the overland party arrived at the cliffs above the site of the wreck, they found dozens of passengers clinging to the rigging. and the few unsubmerged parts of the Valencia's hull. Without any remaining lifelines, however, they could do nothing to help the survivors, and within hours a large wave washed the wreckage off the rocks and into the ocean. Every remaining passenger drowned. The SS City of Topeka arrived and searched for survivors. They found one of the two life rafts with 18 men on board. The second life raft eventually drifted to shore near Barkley Sound with 4 survivors. Although the death toll varies as high as 187, the official number is 137 persons. Not one of the women or children on board was among the 37 survivors. 8. The Orang Medan. Maritime history is full of tales of ghost ships and sea serpents. Not all of these are true and accurate accounts, or if they are, then are prone to exaggerations and embellishment. Accounts of these natures are hotly debated between believers and skeptics. While some of these stories originate from centuries ago, one of the more curious tales is mere decades old. Depending on which report is accurate, a curious radio message was received by numerous ships traveling along the Straits of Malacca, situated around Sumatra and Malaysia, in either June 1947, or as late as February 1948. At the time, the origins of this message, and source, were not known. The message itself was divided into 2 parts, separated by Morse code that could not be deciphered. Those that received this message insisted that the transcript went, "All officers, including the captain, are dead. Lying in chart room and bridge. Possibly whole crew dead. I died." Nothing else was transmitted after this chilling conclusion. 2 ships, both American, picked up the messages and felt compelled to investigate. With the help of British and Dutch listening posts, the coordinates of the vessel thought to be transmitting, the Dutch freighter SS Orang Medan, were triangulated, and an American merchant ship, the Silver Star, was sent to the coordinates. Given the content of the distress calls, the captain of the Silver Star wasted no time in navigating to the new heading. Several hours later, the lookout on board the Silver Star spotted the stricken Orang Medan. Even as the rescue ship pulled alongside, no signs of life could be seen visually. All efforts to contact the crew failed, forcing the captain of the Silver Star to organize a search party. The moment that the search party boarded, it was obvious that the messages were horribly accurate. The decks of the Orang Medan were littered with the corpses of the Dutch crew. To a man, the victims were found with wide-eyed horror and faces twisted into sheer terror, arms trying to fight off something. Not even the ship's dog escaped the terror of whatever had taken place. The canine was discovered to be in the midst of snarling at the cause. The captain was found, as one might have expected, on his bridge. The remainder of the bridge officers were found in the wheelhouse and chart room. The radio operator, who presumably sent the distress call, was found at his station. The engineering crew were also found at their stations with precisely the same expressions on their faces. During the search efforts, the rescue party noticed several things that struck them as odd or strange. The local temperature was in excess of 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but members of the team felt an ominous chill emanating from somewhere. Another oddity was the conditions of the victims. All of them had suffered, but none had any injuries to note of. They were also decaying quicker than they should be. The ship itself didn't appear to have suffered any damage, and when the search party returned to the Silver Star, that decision to tow the Orang Medan for salvage was quickly taken. It was only when the ships were tethered together that smoke was discovered below the decks, specifically the number 4 cargo hold. Within seconds of the tow rope being severed, the Orang Medan exploded with enough force to lift it out of the water before sinking to the seabed. The first official mention of the incident was made by the United States Coast Guard in May 1952. In addition to the witness testimony of the state of the crew themselves, the published account added that they were all found with their frozen faces upturned to the sun, staring, as if in fear. The mouths were gaping open and the eyes staring. One of the arguments cited against this ever taking place was the registry of the Orang Medan. Officially speaking, it appears as though it never actually existed. The Silver Star was a real vessel though, but at the time the Orang Medan was supposed to have been floundering. The Silver Star was operating under another registration, Santa Juana. The Grace Line Shipping Company had bought rights to the ship and renamed it. Those that believe in the Orang Medan insist that the ship was registered in Sumatra. At the time, Sumatra was a Dutch colony that formed part of what was known as the Dutch East Indies. In Indonesian, Orang means man and Medan is the largest city on the island of Sumatra. The registered name Orang Medan literally means man from Medan. No records have been produced to back up this ascertain. Even Lloyd's Shipping Registers and the Dictionary of Disasters at Sea 1824 to 1962 has found no mention of the Orang Medan. Professor Theodor Sersdorfer of Essen in Germany has spent much of the last 50 years researching the story of the Orang Medan. Sersdorfer was the first to mention the names of the American ships that originally went in pursuit of the Orang Medan, and refers anyone interested in their own research to a German booklet written in 1954. The author of this publication was a man called Otto Mielke and seemingly knew a lot about the mysterious ship. Not just the route it took, the cargo it carried, but the name of the captain. This booklet, called Das Totenschiffen der Sudsee, established the date as June 1947, and is often rumored to have been authenticated by a crewman aboard the Silver Star. It was also this booklet that mentioned the cargo hold and what might have been stored inside. According to this booklet, the cargo holds contained potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin. If this is actually true, then it could explain why there is no official records anywhere. To have these combustible items on a rough sea is tantamount to negligence of the most severe kind. It could also explain the subsequent explosion shortly after the salvage attempt was made. There are those who speculated that the ship was actually carrying a far more sinister, and altogether more dangerous cargo. Biological weapons manufactured by Japanese scientists as a result of insidious experiments that even the Nazi regime would balk at, could well have been smuggled out of Japan. Known as Unit 731, it was designed to be a secret research and development meant to create the most dangerous chemical and biological weapons to help establish Japanese supremacy. Unit 731 was formed sometime in 1932 by a Japanese bacteriologist called Shiro Ishii, who conducted terrible experiments during the Second World War. Is it feasible that Unit 731 was smuggled on a nondescript merchant vessel, with the foreign crew to avoid drawing unwanted attention to what was taking place? If so, what went horribly wrong? Comparisons to the Philadelphia experiment have been made by some ufologists. Wraiths have also been blamed for whatever happened aboard the ill-fated ship. The unnatural deaths of the entire crew have lent some form of credibility to these, and other causes that imagination have conjured up in the last half a century. Even undead pirates, like the crew of the fictional Black Pearl, have been blamed by some. Was the SS Orang Medan a genuine event or just a mariner's seafaring tale designed to scare, frighten or dissuade? After all, as every sailor is fond of revealing, the one that got away was this big. 7. The Carroll A. Deering. On the morning of January 31, 1921, the Carroll A. Deering was spotted off the shore of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. The five-masted commercial schooner had last made contact with land 2 days before, when Captain Jacobson of the Cape Lookout Lightship fielded a call from the ship. He reported speaking with a thin, red-haired man with a foreign accent, who claimed that the ship had lost its anchors, and its crew was milling about the deck in an unusual fashion. Due to inclement weather, the ship was unreachable for another several days after it was seen on the sandbar, and when rescue crews finally boarded the ship on February 4, it was completely empty. Though all of the crew's belongings, the ship's log and navigation devices, and the lifeboats were gone, it appeared that a meal was being prepared at the time of the crew's disappearance. The only sign of life left on the ship was a few cats. Here's what's known about the Deering. It was a cargo ship that departed from Norfolk, Virginia, on September 8, 1920, reaching its South American destination in Rio de Janeiro by late November. After delivering the ship's freight, the crew stayed in Rio another several days before heading back for North America on December 2nd. During a stopover in Barbados on January 9 to pick up supplies, Hugh Norton, a captain from another ship, overheard First Mate Charles B. McClellan tell of growing frustrations with the captain of the Deering, Captain W.B. Wormley. According to McClellan, the captain had poor eyesight and little ability to lead the crew. Wormley had been a last-minute replacement for the original captain, William M. Merritt. Before the Deering set sail, Merritt became extremely ill, delaying the ship in Delaware for nearly 2 weeks. It turned out Captain Merritt's son, S.E. Merritt, had been the intended first mate. But he decided to stay with his father to help him recover, so McClellan became his last-minute fill-in, and Wormley became captain. Captain Wormley had his own doubts about the crew, which he confided to a trusted friend. His concerns were founded. Before leaving Barbados, McClellan was arrested for threatening Wormley's life. Luckily for McClellan, the captain forgave him and bailed him out of gaol. Afterward, the ship and her crew continued northward towards home. But they never made it, their ship found drifting offshore in North Carolina just a few weeks later. When the Coast Guard came to rescue the Deering, they boarded the ship in an attempt to look for clues. A few strange things stood out. The captain's quarters had footprints from 3 different pairs of boots, meaning a handful of people had been in and out of his personal chamber. There was an extra bed in the room, and it had been recently slept in. On his desk there was a map charting the ship's movements. It was marked in the captain's handwriting up until January 23. Then another person with completely different writing had taken over tracking the ship's course. Over time, there have been plenty of theories as to just what happened in the days between January 29 and January 31, 1921. The most widely held view is that there was a mutiny aboard the ship, after which the crew fled with the lifeboats. This theory is based largely on the testimony of Captain Norton in Barbados about the tension between crew and captain, as well as the unnatural state of the crew on deck when spotted by Captain Jacobson. However, others claim that there is no way lifeboats could have made it to shore, plus no bodies were recovered from the area. Alternative theories include pirate hijacking. The captain's widow thought this was the true cause, prohibition-era rum runners overtaking the ship, and even paranormal activity. They were sailing through the Bermuda Triangle, after all. At one point, the government thought they had found the true cause of the Deering disappearance after a man named Christopher Gray said he discovered a message in a bottle on a North Carolina beach. The message read, "Deering captured by oil-burning boat something like chaser. Taking OFF everything handcuffing crew. Crew hiding all over ship no chance to make escape. Finder please notify headquarters Deering." Gray later confessed he had forged the message after applying for a job at the Cape Lookout lightship, where the Deering had last been seen. Gray thought solving the mystery would help him land the job, but it ended up landing him in federal custody. Now, more than 90 years later, the mystery still remains, and the truth about the Caroline Deering and her vanishing crew may never be known. 6. The Baie-Comeau. There are many stories about ghost ships, phantom ships occasionally seen by people which, the stories go, foretell doom to those that encounter them. One ghost ship, however, is not a ghost ship in the traditional sense, as it was very real. Built in 1914 in Sweden, the SS Baie-Comeau was used for trading routes between Hamburg and Sweden. After WWI, the ship's ownership was transferred to the Hudson's Bay Company. The ship made numerous sailings for Hudson's, mostly carrying cargo to and from the Arctic region. On October 1, 1931, the Baie-Comeau was on a routine voyage, filled with recently acquired furs. An unexpected storm blew in, trapping the ship in a sea filled with ice. The closest city was Barrow, Alaska, the northernmost city in the United States, too far to get to in the blowing snow and high winds. The captain and crew had to stay inside the trapped ship, where they hoped to wait out the storm. By October 15, the ship remained locked in the ice, so 15 of the crew airlifted to safety, while the captain and 14 other crew members made a temporary camp on the ice near the stranded ship. The terrible weather continued to pound down on the crew and the temporary camp went on for weeks. A fierce blizzard hit the area on November 24, and the snow was so heavy that the campers could no longer see the Baie-Comeau, which was still trapped in the ice. The following morning their worst fears came true. The ship had vanished, no doubt sunk by the preceding blizzard. The remaining crew made their way back to civilization. Less than a week later, however, a hunter told the captain that the Baie-Comeau could not have sunk, as he had just seen it floating in the icy waters almost 50 miles from the location where it had been abandoned. The captain was somewhat reluctant to battle the snows to try and find the ship, but he gathered his crew and indeed found the Baie-Comeau in the location the hunter had described. The ship looked to have sustained significant damage, and so the captain feared it wouldn't be seaworthy for much longer and would soon break apart and sink, so the crew gathered the cargo of furs and had everything, including the captain and the crew, airlifted out of the area. And so, the captain thought, the story ended. But it didn't. Over the years residents of the area and other ships have spotted the empty SS Baie-Comeau numerous times, gliding silently across the Arctic waters, drifting from one location to another, totally intact. In March of 1933, some Eskimos, trapped by a storm, took shelter in the Baie-Comeau for a week until the weather improved enough to journey back to their homes. In November of 1939, another ship came close enough to the Baie-Comeau that they were able to board the abandoned ship. Due to the approaching ice floes, however, the captain did not have the time to bring it back to a port, although he did report the empty ship's location. In 1969, the Baie-Comeau was spotted at a distance, once again trapped in an ice pack. This was the last recorded sighting of the ship, and after a few years it was commonly believed that the ship did eventually give in to its deteriorating condition and sank to the bottom of the frigid seas. Not all believed this, though, because in 2006, 75 years after the ship was first abandoned, the state of Alaska formally began an effort to find the mysterious SS Baie-Comeau, the Arctic's elusive wandering ship. 5. The Octavius. The Octavius is a famous apocryphal ghost ship from the 18th century that has earned a formidable reputation in maritime lore. The legend is that a whaler named the Herald spotted the ghost ship adrift off the western coast of Greenland on October 11, 1775. The 5 men on board the Herald went on to check the ship, and found all 28 crew below deck frozen dead and almost perfectly preserved. The most eerie aspect of the ship was the captain, who was still sitting on his table, seemingly writing entries to his log with his pen clutched in his fingers. It seemed as if he was alive, except he wasn't. He was also frozen as he wrote. In the captain's cabin, there were other 2 bodies, a young woman and a boy who was wrapped in a blanket, as if the mother was protecting her child from the cold. After seeing the frozen pilot and bodies in the cabin, the crew of the Herald got spooked, and quickly left the schooner, only taking the captain's log along with them. The last entry in the journal of the Octavius captain was from November 11, 1762, which meant that the ship had been adrift in the Arctic for nearly 13 years. As the entire log was frozen just like the captain, most of the pages slipped out, only the first and last page stayed intact, enough to give a clear indication of the ship's final whereabouts and possible cause of deaths of the crew. In the following years, a number of stories started building up around the discovery of Octavius, suggesting that the ship had left English coast in 1761 heading towards the Orient, and had successfully made to the destination the following year. However, the ambitious captain decided to gamble and took the return journey through the most treacherous, and then very little known Northwest Passage, which led to the Octavius' demise when the crew were frozen after becoming trapped in the icy seas of northern Alaska. However, the ship did actually make it through the Northwest Passage, but only posthumously. After Octavius' encounter with the crew of the Herald, the men had to get off the ship due to the peculiar situation they encountered once on board. After they had left the ship, Octavius was driven away from them due to the high winds and strong streams. Octavius' last recorded position while the people were still alive was 75 newtons and 160 watts, 250 miles north of Barrow, Alaska. Ever since the news of Octavius' discovery reached the mainland, a number of stories started emerging, some based on pure speculation while others genuinely attempting to explain the mysterious freezing of the captain in mid-sentence. However, in many versions of the story, the entire narrative was changed and even the name of the ship was omitted. In a 1905 version of the Octavius story by author David Meyer, the ship was given the name Gloriana and the fact that Captain took the Northwest Passage on his way back was entirely omitted from the story. 4. The Joyita. The strange mystery of the missing people. Sometimes people vanish. The mystery of the MV Joyita is one of those times. MV Joyita was a merchant vessel from which 25 passengers and crew mysteriously disappeared in the South Pacific in 1955. To this day, no evidence of the whereabouts of the missing people has surfaced. The boat was found adrift in the South Pacific without its crew on board. The ship was also in very poor condition, including corroded pipes and a radio which, while functional, only had a range of about 2 miles due to faulty wiring. Despite this, the extreme buoyancy of the ship made sinking nearly impossible. It was impossible for the ship to sink. Investigators, however, were puzzled as to why the crew did not remain on board and wait for help. A strange journey. About 5:00 a.m. on October 3, 1955, the Joyita left Samoa's Apia harbor bound for the Tokelau Islands, about 270 miles, 430 kilometers, away. The boat had been scheduled to leave on the noontide the previous day, but her departure was delayed because her port engine clutch failed. The Joyita eventually left Samoa on one engine. She was carrying 16 crew members and 9 passengers, including a government official, a doctor, a copra buyer, and 2 children. The ship's cargo consisted of medical supplies, timber, 80 empty 45-gallon oil drums and various foodstuffs. The voyage was expected to take between 41 and 48 hours. She was scheduled to return with a cargo of copra. The Joyita was scheduled to arrive in the Tokelau Islands on October 5. On October 6 a message from Whakaofo Port reported that the ship was overdue. No ship or land-based operator reported receiving a distress signal from the crew. A search and rescue mission was launched and, from 6 to 12 October, Sunderlands of the Royal New Zealand Air Force covered a probability area of nearly 100,000 square miles, 260,000 square kilometers, of ocean during the search. But no sign of the Joyita or any of her passengers or crew was found. The ghost ship. 5 weeks later, on November 10, Gerald Douglas, captain of the merchant ship Tuvalu, en route from Suva to Funafuti, sighted the Joyita more than 600 miles, 1,000 kilometers, west from her scheduled route, drifting north of Analevu. The ship was partially submerged and listing heavily, her port deck rail was awash, and there was no trace of any of the passengers or crew. 4 tons of cargo were also missing. A strange discovery. The party that boarded the ship noted that the radio was discovered tuned to 2182 kHz, the International Marine Radio Telephone Distress Channel. The electric clocks on board had mysteriously stopped at 10:25. The ship's logbook, sextant, mechanical chronometer and other navigational equipment, as well as the firearms Miller kept in the boat, were missing. A doctor's bag was found on deck, containing a stethoscope, a scalpel, and 4 lengths of blood-stained bandages. There was still fuel in Joyita's tanks. From the amount used, it was calculated she made some 243 miles, 391 kilometers, before her engine stopped, probably just 50 miles, 80 kilometers, of Tokelau. Although the Joyita was found with her bilges and lower decks flooded, her hull was sound. Given the fact that the hull of the Joyita was sound and her design made her unsinkable, a main concern of investigators was determining why the passengers and crew did not stay on board if the events were simply triggered by the small flooding in the engine room. The Japanese did it. The Fiji Times and Herald quoted at the time from an impeccable source to the effect that the Joyita had passed through a fleet of Japanese fishing boats during its trip and had observed something the Japanese did not want them to see. 3. The Lady Love Island. Across the world, many maritime personnel have held particular traditions and superstitions for centuries. Perhaps nowadays a lot of those have been relaxed or even forgotten. Among the perennial superstitions for sailors was the allowance of women on board a vessel. Fortunately, in these more enlightened times this is no longer the case. Back in 1748, however, beliefs such as this were rampant. The triple-masted schooner named Lady Love Island, occasionally referred to as Lady Love Island, was being prepared for sail the day before St. Valentine's Day, which perhaps ominously fell on a Saturday that year. Captain Simon Reed planned a voyage along the River Thames towards the open sea and circumnavigate the Kent coast before heading out towards the sunnier climes of Portugal. Reed organized this entire trip as a honeymoon for his new bride, Annetta. The initial evening of this voyage was very much a party atmosphere, with celebrations taking place all across the decks. With the exception of one man, First Mate John Rivers, the whole of the crew was pleased for the happy couple. Rivers actually served as Reed's best man at the wedding ceremony. Perhaps this was the catalyst for what was to happen within several hours of the voyage beginning. Rivers was also smitten by the beautiful Annetta and less than inclined to participate in the on-board festivities. Even though his infatuation of the blushing bride was likely a secret one, he concocted a plan to get some measure of revenge. Whether or not his intentions were realized fully will probably never be known. 6 miles off the Deal coast, not far from the Straits of Dover, is a geological feature known as the Goodwin Sands. This anomaly is approximately 10 miles long, and lies between 8 to 15 meters below the surface of the English Channel and has enough of a reputation to wreck something in the region of 2,000 vessels down the years. One of those victims was the Lady Love Island. As the Lady Love Island made its approach to Goodwin Sands, Rivers made his move. Sufficient quantities of alcohol only helped fuel his feelings of rage and envy, and compelled him to sneak up behind the acting boss and deliver a hard blow to the back of the man's head. With the ship at his mercy, Rivers showed none and deliberately ran the Lady Love Island aground on the shifting sands at Goodwin. This disaster left no survivors. The story of the Lady Love Island does not end there. 5 decades on to the day, the skipper of another vessel, the Edenbridge, was a man called James Westlake. In his log he recorded how his ship almost collided with another vessel with a trio of masts. This vessel, described as a schooner, came so close to the Edenbridge that sounds of a celebration were heard. The Edenbridge was not the only vessel to witness this near miss. A fishing boat also reported a sighting of the same thing, but with additional details. The trawler's captain added that he saw as one ship continue onwards almost unconcerned until it broke up shortly after. Rescue efforts to retrieve any possible survivors were ended when the sandbanks were empty and silent. On the 13th February and 50 years after the sighting there was another. Local residents saw a ship with 3 masts on its way to a collision with the Goodwin Sands. Like the Edenbridge incident, no wreckage was found nor any evidence that a collision had actually taken place. Similar reports were made in 1898 of an identical incident. The last report to be filed was made in 1948 by Captain Bull Prestwick. He allegedly sighted the Lady Love Island and considered her to be a real vessel and not a ghost ship. This was despite his admission that the vessel was giving off a strange and eerie green glow. No known report was made in 1998, but a vast number of people, having heard the history of the sightings, turned up in the expectation of seeing the vessel for themselves. All of these potential witnesses ended up disappointed as the Lady Love Island herself was a no-show. Nobody knows whether reported sightings were bogus or misidentified genuine ships, or if the Lady Love Island has finally made peace with history. Nobody will know for certain for at least another 35 years. 2. The Mary Celeste. On 4th of December, 1872, a ship now known as the Mary Celeste was found adrift in the choppy seas of the Atlantic. The ship was in full sail and in sound and seaworthy condition with ample provisions, but when it was boarded it was found to be completely empty. The crew had vanished without a trace. It is a mystery that has endured for more than 135 years. In January 1885, a ship slammed into Rochelos Reef, and was wrecked off the island of Haiti. The captain, Gilman Parker, sold the salvage rights to the American consul for $500, and made an insurance claim for the alleged value of the ship's cargo. This was the end of one of the most infamous ships to have sailed the seas, the Mary Celeste. However, it was the incident 13 years prior to Parker's wrecking of the Mary Celeste that made it one of history's most enduring mysteries. The Mary Celeste was a merchant brigantine that was launched under British registration in 1861 as Amazon. 7 years later, she was transferred to American ownership, and was rechristened as the Mary Celeste. The ship continued to sail uneventfully until her 1872 voyage from New York to Genoa. The ship's captain was Benjamin Briggs, a man said to be a staunch abstainer from alcohol and a devout Christian. Captain Briggs was also described as a brave officer who would not abandon his ship unless to save his life. The first mate, Albert Richardson, was also considered fit to command, and was handpicked by Captain Briggs. Additionally, Captain Briggs' wife, his infant daughter, and 6 other crew members were on board the Mary Celeste. Towards the end of October 1872, the loading of the ship's cargo, 1701 barrels of poisonous denatured alcohol, began. On the 7th of November, the Mary Celeste left New York Harbor, and sailed into the Atlantic. On the 4th of December, the British brigantine De Gracia discovered the Mary Celeste sailing aimlessly between the Azores and Portugal. Upon closer inspection, the crew of the De Gracia discovered that there was no one on board the Mary Celeste, and the last entry in the ship's daily log was written on the 24th of November. In spite of this, the ship was still in seaworthy condition, her cargo still largely intact, and her food and water supply sufficient for 6 months. It was also noted that the crew of the Mary Celeste had left their pipes for smoking behind. According to the explanation of the De Gracia's captain, David Morehouse, this was a sign that the crew had left the ship in a panic. Moreover, the ship's single lifeboat, as well as her chronometer and sextant, were missing. It was also revealed during the cross-examination of Augustus Anderson, a seaman of the De Gracia, in the Admiralty inquiry, that the main halyard, a sturdy rope about 8 centimeters in circumference, was found to be broken and hanging over the side of the Mary Celeste. From these bits of evidence, a possible scenario may be pieced together. Something happened on the Mary Celeste that made the captain panic, and he ordered the crew to get into the lifeboat, and abandon ship. The halyard was used, then tied to the lifeboat, and the captain and his crew trailed behind the Mary Celeste to see what would happen to her. The panic turned out to be a false alarm. Unfortunately for Captain Briggs, his family and crew, the halyard snapped during the raging storm, and they were unable to get themselves back to the Mary Celeste. 1. The Flying Dutchman. On July 11, 1881, the log of the British Royal Navy vessel Batchen sailing off the Cape of Good Hope record, during the middle watch, the Flying Dutchman crossed our bows. She appeared as a strange, red light, as of a ship all aglow, in the midst of which light the masts, spars and sails stood out in strong relief. The following forenoon, the lookout who first sighted the ghost ship fell to his death. Later, the squadron commander suddenly became ill and died. The Flying Dutchman is a legendary ghost ship that can never make port, doomed to sail the oceans forever. It probably originates from 17th century nautical folklore. The oldest story can be dated to the late 18th century. Sightings in the 19th and 20th centuries reported the ship to be glowing with ghostly light. If hailed by another ship, the crew of the Flying Dutchman will try to send messages to land, or to people long dead. However, it is said that all legends have a basis in fact, and the legend of the Flying Dutchman bears no exception to this. Of all the documented ghost ships, none are perceived to be as scary as the sighting of the Flying Dutchman. Even today, the legend of the ship is one that intensifies the aspect of scariness and eeriness. Purported to be a man of war, the Flying Dutchman ship is said to have come across turbulent waters in the southwestern African Cape of Good Hope in the mid-1600s. The much recounted folklore and the mystery shrouding the vessel are not for the vessel itself but for the man who skippered the ghost ship. Accounts vary about the name of the skipper of the Flying Dutchman. According to some, the captain was one Hendrik van der Decken, whose deep contemplation about the plight of his seamen and resultant oblivion to the approaching storm in the coast of the Cape led to the ship being destroyed. The Dutchman is called the harbinger of death and destruction for those vessels which have sighted it. It has also been retold countless times that letters and missives used to be passed on to those ships that passed the Dutchman in the route. The opening of these letters and missives by the crew resulted in the ships getting destroyed and the crew parting with their lives. Right from the time the myth emerged in the 1600s, various sightings of the ghost vessel were reported in the Cape of Good Hope. All these sightings happened when the weather was extremely stormy and the gales were lashing hard. Even German U-boat crews in the Second World War feared the Dutchman, seen east of Suez. Admiral Karl Donitz wrote, "The men said they preferred the strength of the Allied fleet in the North Atlantic to the terror of a second meeting with the Phantom." Another story identifies the captain as Bernard Foch, who was said to have struck a bargain with the devil to reach the Indies in 90 days. For that he was condemned forever to sail the waters off the southern capes. The captain stood on the deck of the ship, counting off the centuries on his hourglass. The latest sighting of the vessel was reported in the 1940s by people who gave accurate description of a vessel of the 1600s without having any prior knowledge about the vessels of that era. At present, the oceanic realm seems to be quiet with respect to the sighting of the Dutchman, though its lure has not lessened in any manner whatsoever.